Welcome back to another episode of the Max Stern Podcast. Kyle Stitch here alongside James Finch, and today is our trade deadline recap. It was a fun 24-ish hours. The NHL teams, for whatever reason, this year really gave James Duthie a good time, and he didn't have to sit up on Trade Center for hours and hours on end just killing time or anything. It was a very interesting, there were actually lots of good discussions to be had. So this episode is kind of our perspective on trades that occurred, and then we're also going to record an episode looking forward to the summer, which will include some trades that maybe didn't happen, kind of where the free agent market kind of stands as well. So that's kind of the plan for this episode and then the next one. So we're calling this kind of the retrospective, and then the next episode will be kind of the prospective, future looking. So we appreciate you listening. Max Stern Podcast available on pretty much all major podcast platforms. Our content, contract projections available on X at AFP Analytics. Be talking about probably referencing a few in this one, but definitely more in the next episode as we look to the summer. And with that, I think we'll get into it. We're going to go back a little ways. We're using our friends at Cap Wages. Our projections are featured there in a couple places. If you want to click on a team, see kind of where their current players sit and would fit into their cap, you can do that. There's also projections on the RFA and UFA board. So kind of prominent there, and they have a great user interface and everything, like very clean, good to look at. So
very, very clean.
Very clean. Like if you're looking for a cap-friendly user, just an interface to look at, this is the site to do it. No disrespect to Puckpedia, who are doing a lot of really have filled the void really well, but I think Cap Wages definitely, at least from just a user looking experience, it feels more familiar and cleaner for us.
Yep.
Anyways, let's start with the Colorado Avalanche New York Ranger trade. Ryan Lindgren, Jimmy Vesey prospect to the Avalanche in exchange for Juuso Parssinen, Calvin DeHaan, couple picks, most prominently a second-round pick that was acquired in the Mikko Rantanen trade from Carolina.
A pretty, I would say, fair trade. Lindgren hasn't been doing too well, kind of dating back to the second half of last season. But he's also that defensive, a little more physical defenseman, and for Colorado, he's probably slotting in with everyone healthy bottom pair. So that could be a good fit. Jimmy Vesey, pretty solid, pretty good fourth liner, okay third line, sneaky, decent defensively as a forward. And I guess nothing of what I just said is a huge flash. It's not a superstar move, but the way things had kind of been going and appearing to be this deadline, second round pick, and it's probably going to be a later-ish one, regardless of what pick it actually ends up being between Carolina or New York. I guess with New York, it could be a little closer to the middle of the round, but for Lindgren being kind of the main asset and call it a depreciating one, second round pick's not bad for New York. And Parssinen, so he showed some flashes in Nashville, gets moved to Colorado, doesn't quite fit well. If it works in New York, fine. If it doesn't, also fine. So yeah, I guess they got a couple picks, shook up their group a little bit. DeHaan's a fine bottom pair extra defenseman.
It's really the second round pick that's the value, probably the valuable asset in this trade. I think we'll kind of save. I mean, both teams were more active in the deadline kind of time, so we'll save, I think, a little bit more overall thought there for both those teams. Same day, March 1st, Gustav Nyquist from Nashville to Minnesota for a second round pick. Retention played a role in that return. I mean, that was a pretty obvious one to get done.
Yeah, and Nyquist is still he's not putting up a point per season like he did a couple years ago or close a couple years ago. Um, but he's still pretty serviceable, a solid middle six winger. So good pickup.
Yeah, he fit well with Minnesota in his last stint there.
Yeah.
But just a pretty solid trade for both teams there makes sense. Friday, was it Friday night? Was March 1st? Thursday night? Friday? I think it was Friday night. Friday
Friday
night
night.
was one of the what would have been viewed as a massive trade, only to be overshadowed the next week by a few bigger trades. But like, if this was the biggest trade of the kind of trading season in the NHL, this was still a pretty good one.
Yeah.
Chicago found a suitor for Seth Jones in the Florida Panthers. They send a fourth round pick with Jones, retaining some salary there. Couple million, I think, ultimately in total, gets the cap hit down to just like 7.1 or something for Jones. Somewhere, I remember joking that it was very similar to Montour's contract, which is like 7.1, somewhere in there.
Yeah.
So that's what Florida's going to have for Seth Jones. Chicago getting back goalie prospect. I don't know if prospect still. Young goalie.
Young goalie.
Spencer Knight. And first round pick in 2026, unless Florida trades it before, I think before just the draft, then Chicago gets the 2027. That's kind of weird. It's going
Yeah.
even farther than that Vegas condition last year.
Right. I don't mind. Like, I like this deal. I think for both teams. Um, Florida very badly at that moment in time needed defensemen and someone who could play top 4 minutes. Um, Seth Jones probably wasn't playing to his overall potential in Chicago. Also, was probably playing a much heavier role than he should be. Um, so at that moment in time, that move for Florida, I think probably being able to bring him in and slot him in, call it second pair, but at least split time first and second pair and not be like the guy, should be a much better fit. For Chicago, um, they didn't really have a goalie of the future. They had drafted Drew Commesso.
Camiso, I think.
He's struggled a bit. So it's not to say he's not a future NHL goalie, but the timeline might be a little bit longer than Chicago was hoping for. And Spencer Knight, when he's been in the lineup and good to go, he's been pretty solid. And this year he's been good. So that actually even kind of hurt Florida a little bit now. But ultimately he wasn't their starter. So fine moving him. So Chicago kind of has their starter of the future, and then being able to get a first as well is pretty solid, I think. Especially, and this is really the big factor, he was supposedly only willing to go to Florida or Dallas, and it had come out, and this doesn't necessarily mean it's 100% true, but the report was Dallas wasn't interested. So in that scenario, that kind of just left Florida. So for Chicago to be able to get back a starting goaltender and a first round pick, pretty good.
Yeah. And I think so. As shortly before we sat down to record this episode as well, it came out Aaron Ekblad has been suspended 20 games for testing positive for a banned performance enhancing substance. Not going to speculate any further. He said that he had taken something in recovery that he shouldn't have. And so that's the facts as we know them. Whether Florida was aware of the pending suspension when they made the trade, it's definitely possible. We got about almost 10 days from when the trade was made to the
Yeah.
announcement. I don't know how quick the NFL or the NHL moves on things. The NFL's usually gives a little bit of a heads up and everything. So you just don't. I don't know. We don't know for sure, but
If they didn't know, it's huge that they made the move.
yes, it's even
Like in
bigger.
hindsight, it's way bigger. Which I guess is still big, even if they did know, because I guess they knew they had to do it in that scenario.
Yeah, and if they knew that they needed to do it a little bit more, it goes to your point of you kind of laid out. Florida was kind of negotiating against themselves, but like making sure they got it over the finish line
Right.
was
Which,
worthwhile.
and I think that's an important point, quick from Chicago's perspective, is this isn't a deal that they had to do right now.
No.
So even though some leverage was gone with Seth Jones's no move clause, they were kind of in a situation where they could say, well, if we don't get something that we're happy with, we'll wait. Why not? So solid all around, even a little more solid now in hindsight, now that we know the Ekblad situation. So, I don't mind that deal at all for both teams. I think in general, those three trades we just went over on March 1st were fairly solid for both sides. Kind of everyone should be happy.
Yeah, one thing that pointed out on X at the time, I've pointed out probably like 5 times, multiple times on this podcast too. Chicago used their last retention spot for the season in this Seth Jones trade.
Yes.
The other being one of them being being the middleman for Mikko Rantanen, and the first one is escaping me right now. It might have been another season of someone that they had traded last offseason. But while you get who the other retention spot is, it just makes that getting involved in the Mikko Rantanen trade just a little bit. Every day it was head scratching, especially for the return they got. But they gave up Taylor Hall and used a retention spot. Like the amount of retention doesn't really matter, but only getting a third round pick in return for the money plus Taylor Hall. I mean, I guess the fact that was fairly significant makes the pick look a little worse, but from their perspective, having an extra spot probably would have been more valuable because they didn't end up, I don't think, sending anyone else necessarily out. And that could have been partially because they had like an Alec Martinez on a $4 million contract that I don't think many contenders were going to be willing to take on at that price. You have the other retention player for me?
The last year of Jake McCabe's current deal is still on the books.
So they got a good return in that trade. So that I can't necessarily knock them for.
So not going to knock them for the McCabe one. Not going to knock them really for Seth Jones. The issue is that, call it the middle trade, the Rantanen retention. That, as you laid out, I 100% agree. Price wasn't enough to ship out Taylor Hall and retain that money on Rantanen's deal, $4.6 million, which $3 million. A third round draft pick for that amount of retention is a little low, well, cheap price wise, I would say. So yeah, just kind of a weird asset management situation.
I mean, we don't know for sure, but the way how much of a seller's market it was, if Chicago still had Hall and the retention spot, being able to maybe trade him at 50%, I think at worst they get a second. At worst.
Yeah, well, so that's the other thing is as we approach the deadline here, kind of March 1st and on, it became clear the prices were going to be a little, well, I don't know if it's fair to call them inflated because it was kind of that way across the board the entire week, but higher than most people expected, I think. So, yeah, in hindsight, again, now that it's, what was it, about a month or month and a week removed from the Rantanen trade, prices seemed like they kind of increased a little bit. So hindsight, maybe they missed out a little bit on some extra value.
Yep. I think that's enough harping on them. I'll skip a trade and we'll get back to the Boston Edmonton one, but kind of in tandem with the Panthers sending out Spencer Knight, they then went and acquired Vitek Vanacek for a prospect. Absolutely solid move by Florida. Like they needed a backup goalie.
Yeah,
No
so
complaints.
yeah, once they did that, I was kind of wondering if they were gonna stick with Chris Dreger.
Yes, who they
Um,
actually ended up trading as well.
right. So I guess we can kind of mention that
Yeah,
one.
sure.
So it was a goalie swap, him for Capo Kakinen
With
with
Winnipeg.
Winnipeg.
Correct.
Um, so a little bit of depth still there. But this Vanacek one was kind of the obvious. Okay, Spencer Knight's gone. What's the goalie situation? Um, Pretty clear it's Bobrovsky's net. So just kind of having some bodies behind him.
Yep. Your guy Dan Vladar might have made sense as a pivot if necessary. Anyways,
Yeah, sure. I don't know about it, but
Van
yeah,
now Vanacek's a solid backup option. I think this was a smart move by Florida. Trade we skipped chronologically at least. Big one. This was kind of the signal that Boston's open for business. I mean,
yeah.
maybe not full on, but like this was
There
probably
could
the
be some things
yes.
happening there.
So Edmonton acquired Trent Frederick at a quarter of his salary because New Jersey acted as a middleman. Also got depth forward Max Jones, prospect Peter Hauser. New Jersey got a prospect in return for their trouble. And then Boston, second round pick, prospect, and a fourth round pick. Second round pick also seemingly originally belonged to St. Louis, so that could be in the upper half of the second round. So
Yeah,
pretty decent there. I mean, Frederick is going to be out a couple more weeks. We don't even know how many regular season games he's going to end up playing.
exactly.
I think Boston did absolutely fine in this trade, at least.
Yeah, so I think kind of reflecting back to when we did our trade boards not too long ago, kind of mentioning price wise, it could be roughly a late first for Frederick. I think this makes sense. Just with the injury uncertainty, it could be a mid to high second round pick. So I guess that's not. I don't know. Once you get to the 20s in the first round, like it's not that much different than pick 5 in the second. This could still be a little later than that, but what I would be hoping to get for Trent Frederick in a trade as a rental, this is fine.
Yeah, I think at one point thought maybe they could get a first, but injuries and Frederick hasn't been quite as good this year. I mean,
Yeah.
no one in Boston's been quite as good this year. But I mean, I think a second's pretty fair indeed. That next up chronologically brings us to one of the bigger but also maybe less surprising trades of the entire deadline.
Part of it.
Yeah, I mean the inclusion of the second piece, I guess, isn't shocking. We had actually
No.
alluded to it. So Tampa Bay Lightning here. We had talked about Yanni Gore being going back to Tampa Bay. That seemed like you had him on your trade board, and I basically gave it no thought and said I fully expect him back in Tampa.
Yeah.
So that's not necessarily surprising. We had talked about Alvar Bjorkstrand as a potential under the radar trade candidate. I think he was on Frank Saravalli's board, and we brought that up a little bit more. And yeah, he also went to Tampa Bay.
So that's kind of the part that I'm saying is I guess surprising or a shock isn't the right way to put it. It's just more significant. Gord was it's kind of easy. Okay, rental center. They need bottom six, third line help. He was there before. They love him. Kind of easy to pinpoint that one. Bjorkstrand having term ultimately means this is just going to be a bigger deal. Um, so there needing to be multiple first round picks and a second round pick. That's driven much more by Bjorkstrand than it is Yanni Gord.
A little bit with Gord needing retention. With Seattle
Yes.
doing some retention here.
So I'm thinking that is like a first and a second for Bjorkstrand, and maybe even Mike Isimont is Bjorkstrand. So first, second, and a roster fourth liner.
A decent role player, yeah.
For Bjorkstrand, and then Gord for one of the firsts.
Yep.
Pretty much.
Yep.
Love it for Tampa. Again, they get Gord back. They needed bottom six help. And really, Bjorkstrand, we'll see throughout the rest of the season how it shakes out, but he also could be part of that third line. They needed more depth up front. They didn't really need help elsewhere, or at least not nearly as bad. So love it for Tampa. Seattle, they kind of, I don't know. I mean, was it Seattle where you kind of mentioned spinning their wheels a little bit?
I was gonna say one of the episodes we were kind of putting maybe on the like to do list is a little bit more on Seattle, because that's not gonna say a full on disaster because they did make the playoffs that one year, but outside of kind of getting hot one year, they've really bungled the expansion draft and subsequent management of their roster. Really, like,
Yeah.
anyways, we'll save. I would like to go deeper, so we'll save that in for a future episode. But
I'll say this trade return, making this move, I think is good for them.
oh yes,
It's just kind of
the fact that they're in the position to be
Yes.
making this trade is where I have more of an issue. I
Yes.
think this is fantastic, borderline home run for them.
Yeah.
I mean, Bjorkstrand, yeah, I mean, they parlayed him into a very nice asset. Like, that was a savvy move when they got him and then parlayed him out. But it's just the fact that they are sellers again,
Yes.
very clearly sellers again, is kind of like, what are we doing here?
Yep.
Next up, very minor trade. Pittsburgh ended up with Vincent Desjardins. I believe they ended up keeping him. They did so much.
They flipped him to San Jose.
Did they? Oh, sorry.
So-
yeah,
so
they got him
they-
from Vancouver and
Yep.
then flipped him to San Jose.
Which kind of led into this next trade.
Which then they end up flipping.
Yeah.
So this one I had said, I bet you there's a subsequent move because it was very odd at the time. So they made a swap with Nashville, sending Michael Bunting to Nashville along with a 4th round pick. Got back Tommy Novak and Luke Shen. Luke Shen being traded out to Winnipeg for a 2nd and a 4th round pick. So they turned Bunting into Novak and a 2nd, basically.
Yeah.
Which, I mean, Novak has center flexibility. Bunting does not. Otherwise, at least analytic-wise, pretty similar players. Novak maybe a little bit more upside.
Yeah. So like I kind of, when you put it that way, I like it for Pittsburgh.
Yeah. It was when we kind of see the end of it, but if like they had acquired Luke Shen and kept him on their roster for this year, like that to me didn't make it would have been fine, but like it didn't make a lot of sense to make the trade. But okay, they upgrade and then also get another pick to go along with that. I think that that's it's decent work. It's still a little head scratching. I think I'm more surprised Nashville did this move.
For me, my question is kind of Nashville. Like, what's What exactly is in it for you? Because, like you said, so it's very similar players. I agree that Novak might be, I don't know, there might be a little more to work with there, potentially a little more um, skill to tap into. So for Nashville to acquire Bunting, who can be a good player in the right role, but just the situation they're in, really, like they should be the ones turning their roster forwards into picks at this deadline. Um, I think what ended up happening here is even though it's been a very poor season for Nashville, a lot of those contracts they're now locked into aren't going away. So I don't know if they really see the avenue to really hit the redo or reset button. I think it might be more of a retool for Nashville, even though I don't know. We'll see how that goes for them. But yeah, so I just for them to move out Novak and Shen and not really have any future assets back other than a fourth, not great.
Yeah, I mean, if you had just said they had swapped Novak for Bunting, like fine, like
Yeah,
fine, but they also gave up Luke Shen, who ended up going for a second round pick. Like, there is no reason that they shouldn't have been the team at least getting the second round pick back for Luke Shen.
yeah.
I think that's the
That's
kind of like
pretty
they
much what
kind
I
of
expect.
overpaid to get for a lateral move forward.
Yeah.
So I think what signaled that the rental market was going to be pretty high prices.
Yeah.
Brian Dumoulin going to New Jersey for a second round pick and a prospect. Not like a super high level prospect, but a prospect nonetheless. I mean, coming on the heels of that Shen trade, like that's got to be an instant regret on Nashville's part.
Yeah. Well, I mean, so that pretty much signals like, hey, we could have gotten a second for Luke Shen
Yeah.
right away. So, I mean, Dumoulin 50% retained. It was like about 1.6 million, just under. Solid veteran, I guess, for hopefully their bottom pair or just an extra guy. Multiple cups is gonna factor in, I guess, to the price. Um, so that's at first it's kind of a shock, especially it being kind of the first whoa deal, but it ends up kind of blending right in with most of the other trades that happen for either like bottom six or bottom pair type players.
Yeah, I think the one interesting thing I take away from it is New Jersey still doesn't fully see. I know they got some injuries like between Dougie Hamilton and Jonas Siegenthaler, but they still don't seemingly want to fully trust Simon Nemec and Seamus Casey in particular. I think Luke Hughes is at least getting trust, but like they seem to want to not play the young defenseman, which I can kind of understand, but they're also very closely getting to Detroit Red Wing territory where they just keep adding
Yeah.
veteran bodies and clogging up their pipeline. So rental for Dumoulin, fine, but it's kind of the overall philosophy that's worrying me a little bit in with New Jersey of how they're kind of approaching their blue line, especially. I mean, what I don't know exactly when the Jack Hughes injury happened in tandem with this, so he's unfortunately out for the remainder of the season, including the playoffs. So they that's kind of a step back from them necessarily being contenders. So there's even less of a like reason to make this.
That almost so I don't want to keep jumping up the trade board, but I think it just sometimes makes sense too. Um, One of the very last trades was something that seems kind of minor, but it's still NHL players. They acquired Cody Glass from Pittsburgh, who has kind of been like a no offense, solid defensively bottom six center. Um, I would have liked to have seen, instead of spending that second and adding the about 1.6 million of Dumoulin, I would have liked to have seen that asset and that cap space go to a center at the deadline. And it was rumored they were pretty heavily involved in a lot of the centers and discussions to trade for him, but to ultimately end up with your center edition being Cody Glass, I don't have a problem with them still trying to push for the playoffs and be a strong team after the Hughes injury. I more have an issue with kind of what they did at the deadline. It doesn't really match up what clear needs were. And I want to say I'm pretty sure Hughes came before the injury came before that Dumoulin trade.
I think you're right there. Because the Dumoulin trade was the night before the deadline, so or the
Yeah.
day before. I think the Hughes was injury was a couple days before. Yeah, I fully agree. I think if you're gonna roll the dice and gamble someplace, I'd rather roll the dice on promising defensive prospects playing minutes than like unknowns at center.
Trade a second for Tommy Novak. You couldn't at that point.
Yeah.
But like I don't know. I won't skip up the board and give really examples out there, but use your assets and your cap space for like the clear obvious need, the obvious hole that just opened up in your lineup. You're not going to replace Jack Hughes, but try and shoot for a little better than Cody Glass. Respectfully, just someone with a little more offensive up in the lineup ability.
Yeah. Next trade, San Jose got a 4th-round pick for Nico Sturm, pure rental player, probably for the from Nico Sturm went to the Florida Panthers in addition to a 7th-round pick. Again, probably pure rental and 4th-line center, good on faceoffs, true center, so it gives them a little bit more lineup flexibility with maybe some other guys. And again, good on faceoffs, which is not an insignificant point to make. I mean,
No, teams look for that specifically this time of year. So
yeah, I'm not gonna say that all faceoffs matter, but there are at times faceoffs that you do want a guy that you feel comfortable out taking a draw out there.
so that's a big numbers analytics thing, and I think there's two very different sides, and I think it's ultimately a land in the middle thing. Like they can matter, they don't always matter, and it's not something that doesn't matter at all because there are people that will kind of cling to the extremes there. And when you're a Stanley Cup contender, sometimes that's kind of the issue you need to fill in your lineup is just, hey, maybe someone that can win some faceoffs because the rest of our lineup's pretty good.
Yep, and I mean, I'm not gonna say he's a rock star like player, but fine on the 4th line, fine depth player,
Yeah.
and the fact that Florida has LTIR space for Matthew Tkachuk being out for the regular season, San Jose couldn't retain, so Florida was able to get Nico Sturm for just a 4th-round pick.
Yep.
Vegas made, I think it was their only deadline deal, shockingly.
Yeah, they're whoever runs their social media tried to tease something towards the 3 o'clock
Yeah.
Eastern mark, but yeah, Riley Smith was the main sole acquisition for Vegas.
Sending out Brendan Brisson, top prospect, and a 3rd-round pick. The Rangers had Riley Smith, they're the ones who acquired Brisson in the 3rd-round pick. I like that deal for the Rangers a lot.
I think I lean Rangers, but I'm fine with it for both. If this was a year, 2 years ago, I would be very in favor of the Rangers. But I think it's taken a little while for. I'll say this: the holes with all the different injuries and some players leaving that Vegas has had up front, I just wonder why Brisson hasn't kind of cracked the lineup there.
Yeah.
So, like, again, a couple years ago, huge win this trade would be for the Rangers. Um, Maybe right now, like, okay, they dealt a pending UFA, still a decent prospect and a third. It's probably a win on their part, but I don't think it's too lopsided at all.
I think I like it a little bit more for the Rangers, just because like Riley Smith. I guess this year he had been playing well, but like
I will say this year he was probably one of their more consistently
yeah.
better players.
So I guess that's the only like downside is they are trying to still compete, but it seems like he's had a rough go at times in New York. So anyways, I think it's pretty solid for the Rangers getting a decent prospect back
Yeah.
and a decent pick. Next trade up that we haven't touched on, Carson Soucy to the Rangers for a third round pick. This one to me was a little bit of a head scratcher in tandem with everything else the Rangers had done. Like they got DeHaan. Soucy's better than DeHaan. Let's be very clear there. But
Well, he should be.
he should be.
This year he's not, or
But
hadn't been.
but he should be.
Yes, he should be. Move out Lindgren, bring in Soucy. It's just a shakeup, ultimately.
Improve your.
And Soucy's controllable next year.
Yep. Gave up a third, got a second back for Lindgren, so a little bit of an arbitrage with picks there. Just I don't know. To me, you're hopefully Soucy's good, like good for them this year and next year. But to me, do they make any other defensive trades? Because at one point there was definitely a tweet about how many defensemen they have.
Yeah, they moved out Brandstrom,
who I don't even know was included on that list or not. Yeah, Brandstrom to Buffalo for Nick Aube-Kubel. Basically, AHL swaps. Aube-Kubel maybe plays some minutes on the fourth line in New York. Brandstrom might see some minutes in Buffalo. Very possible with the other moves Buffalo ended up making. But I don't know. The Rangers have a lot of NHL defensemen. Just kind of did a lot of like wheel spinning, rearranging, but everything's still right back to it's kind of like I don't know, kind of moving all the things in your house around, but they still exist and they're still not necessarily put away.
It's kind of like the same stuff.
Yeah,
But
it's when you have
new.
It's when you have company coming over and instead of having it out in the dining room, you throw it all in a closet or something, but it's still there and needs to be addressed type thing. Not speaking from too much experience.
Yeah, I don't know. That's a very like to me, it's fine. It's a shake up, move out Lindgren, acquire Soucy. Could end up actually looking good because of that extra year if he does play well. A team sort of on the outside trying to fight back into the playoffs. Yeah, it's fine.
Next up, Boston Bruins continued their. Yeah, this is another not surprising, but definitely did continue to signal they could be open for business. So they sent out Justin Brosseau, who's been really solid as a depth forward, really good underlying analytic type numbers. They got a couple, they got decent return, I guess. Marat Kuznetsov, Kuznetsov, thank you. Jacob Lauko.
He was a Bruin.
Yep.
They traded him last year. So he's back.
And a 6th round pick.
So a couple things here. Brezzo, I don't think was going to get too much of a return. I think he was kind of popular at times in Boston this year. But ultimately, like I think settles in as like a fine third line winger. And from Minnesota's perspective, I kind of want to point out they were very limited with what they could do at the deadline this year. So this might have been like kind of one of the only moves they could really actually choose to make. The rumors like, okay, they could be in on Brock Nelson. Love the fit. How do you make the money work this year? And if your guys who are injured, they're coming back in season, it's just pretty much money in, money out, which that's what this was. Kuznetsov for sure was on the NHL roster. I know Lauko was at least up and down. He may have been up. So it very little to choose from. They bring in a quality NHL winger. So that's a win for Minnesota, I think.
Boston gets a dice roll at center, which
Yep.
is probably something that's a good idea for them. Like,
Yeah.
I don't think Kuznetsov is going to be a first line center by any means,
No.
but maybe a middle six. Maybe you found a middle six, third line, probably at best center. But for a team organization that's lacking prospects, getting someone who's kind of close to NHL ready is not the worst idea for a player that very likely could have been leaving as a free agent in a couple months.
Exactly.
The big one, I guess it's classified March 6th, very late that night. I think it did because I think I went to bed like right at midnight and it had been finalized by that point. So Colorado got one of the top players, who's top on my trade board, Brock Nelson. Prospect as well went to Colorado, William Dufour.
I don't know that one.
We'll see in edit which pronunciation I keep. I just said like 4. Maybe I'll just keep them all. Colorado gave up a lot. Callum Ritchie, highly touted prospect.
Yeah.
First round pick and a third round pick. Oliver Shillington went to the Islanders, but was given to Anaheim. Literally given because the Islanders got future considerations. Unless future considerations becomes a first line winger for them in the future.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Something I'll say, so that third round pick is not a guaranteed.
Okay.
Colorado has to win the Stanley Cup this year. And Brock Nelson has to play at least 50% of the playoff games, which I assume as long as he's healthy, he would.
That should be
That's the easy part. It's winning the cup in this year, 2025. Not as easy. So it could end up pretty much being Ritchie and a first, which I guess to give all the details, listed as a 2026 first, could turn into a 2027. Colorado had the option to choose to defer to 2027. So yeah, pretty solid return. I mean, top prospect, and a first round pick, which is going to be a late one, but still.
It's Ritchie. It's Ritchie. Like,
yeah, so that's the main piece here.
He is one of the top prospects in all of the NHL. Like, I think like a lot of prospect rankers have him not top 5, but 10 to 20 maybe ish.
Yeah, so this is one where like we just went from talking about Boston trying to get a center, looks like fourth line guy right now, potentially could move up a line or two role wise. This is acquiring a prospect that is pretty much widely considered to be clear top 6 potential.
Yep.
Which is huge for the Islanders.
Yeah.
They gave up a real good player and possibly like Rantanen was moved, but one of the top assets available at the deadline. But they are pretty much bringing in a prospect who instantly becomes their top prospect, I think. Cole Yzerman, not too far behind, but for a team lacking futures or prospects, it's a big win for them.
Ritchie and Cole Yzerman make a pretty nice 1-2 like future line combination.
Probably aren't too far away either.
Correct.
Which is big for them.
Yep. Yep. So trading out Brock Nelson, who very well could have left in free agency, and getting a player who could take a spot in the lineup within even a year, probably more like 2 or 3, but That's the big win for the Islanders, and then getting a first round pick on top of that. I know it could be deferred and it could end up being late, but like that's really really good work by Lou
Yeah.
there. Edmonton got a defenseman, Jake Wallman, who's been a bright spot in San Jose. Gave up a first round pick and a prospect to do so. First round pick being the more significant asset here. Really nice work by Mike Greer in San Jose with Wallman. He has turned Wallman into a first and second round pick for nothing.
Yeah, I was gonna say, can a GM whose team finishes like in the bottom three might even end up being the worst team?
Probably will.
Most likely. Should get some votes for GM of the year, maybe. I hope a Sharks, like a voter, tosses one his way.
It's funny, I was very critical of him about a year ish ago, but like he's done some really savvy things.
Yeah.
In the past, 18
I fully
months.
agree. I think to begin his tenure there, it was very like, what are you doing? But as time's gone on, he's made some savvy moves here and there. So I like it for them. Great asset management. Wallman being, I think he either is 29 or he's going to be 29 soon. So it doesn't quite fit like their timeline in San Jose. So being able to flip him again, and for Edmonton, help on defense. That's pretty important for them, I think.
If they weren't going to get help in goal, getting more help on the blue line, especially someone a little more experienced, very good idea. I mean, I think so. I 100% agree that San Jose, Wallman necessarily doesn't fit their timeline, but to be clear, they didn't need to trade him either. Like,
No.
he's got another year, I think one more year on his contract.
Yep.
Not the worst player for them to have kept for a little bit longer, especially to allow some other younger players maybe the opportunity or not have to force them into the lineup or up in the lineup a little bit. So San Jose didn't have to do this, but when you get that type of return dangled in front of you, especially considering you got paid a second round pick to take him, you're pretty good.
Yep.
Should we? We'll stick to trades, not picking on the Yzer plan.
Yeah, maybe we revisit that.
Yeah.
We'll see.
Anyways, next up, Pittsburgh got a second round pick for Anthony Beauvillier, who's been surprisingly solid this year. Like, he's fallen out of favor in a couple places, has not been great. He's been good for Pittsburgh.
So to me, this is a very good trade for Pittsburgh.
I'm not disagreeing with that either.
Like, this is probably one of the trades I'm more like lopsided to one side for.
I think it probably should have been a third, maybe. I think that probably would have been a little bit more fair, but
based on some other trades that happened, a third would have been a bit more suitable.
But Beauvillier, to be fair, has been better this year. And I don't know. I don't think Washington needed to do a lot. They'll probably get Ryan Leonard in their lineup once his college season ends.
Yeah.
So, I mean, and they're already kind of loaded at forward.
They didn't have to do a whole lot. It was very much like kind of look for some depth pieces up front, which that's what they did right here. I just think it was kind of a steep price for who they acquired.
So next trade up is probably the one that set the tone for kind of how the deadline day was going to go. This was, I think, in most years, this would have been considered the blockbuster of the day. And yet this was probably like the third or fourth biggest trade when all was said and done. So division rivals Buffalo and Ottawa hooked up to both kind of shake up their cores a little bit. So the big kind of swap was Dylan Cozens going to Ottawa for Josh Norris going to Buffalo. Both centers, both on fairly substantial contracts with term left. Buffalo also sent Dennis Gilbert and a second-round pick to Ottawa and got Jacob Bernard-Docker in return. Gilbert for Bernard-Docker is probably a little bit of an upgrade for Buffalo. A little bit. So it's really the Norris for Cozens swap, and then the second-round picks in there. That seems like maybe a little rich for Buffalo to have included the second, but when all's said and done, if you want Kevyn Adams to do something, you probably can't sit here and complain about including a second round pick when they already have oodles of picks and prospects.
Yeah, so it's just I am going to sit here and complain about it.
Okay.
Because supposedly Ottawa had been shopping Norris for months with no taker. Now I think it's extremely likely that with all the Buffalo fans talk of how do we switch things up, who could be on the way out, let's trade Dylan Cozens. I think it's very likely most Buffalo fans overvalued Dylan Cozens. So with all the, let's trade Cozens in a deal for Pettersson, sure, but I think a lot more value would have needed to be in a trade like that. So what I don't love is this is pretty much two teams swapping forwards who were not performing to the level those teams expected. Norris being a little bit more expensive. The second round pick just feels kind of weird. What that feels like to me is Ottawa pretty much sitting there as like, okay, we don't have to do this deal. You're the one under pressure. Throw us a second. And Buffalo kind of having to sit there and say, you know what,
it's time.
It's time. We're under pressure. Which, in a way, you got kind of. Norris could be a better player. I will say between the two players, I think Norris has a little more skill that could kind of lead to him turning things around. It just feel. I think there were a lot of Sabres fans that wanted a move to happen. And in a way, you are 100% right. If you wanted a move, this is a move. It just feels a little, I don't know. It feels a little worked. Like Buffalo got worked a little bit to me.
I mean,
which again, that's the situation they're in. If
exactly,
they want to make a move, but that doesn't mean I'm not going to say value-wise it's a little weird.
Yeah, I mean, both can be true. Like,
right, exactly.
You can say that maybe they gave up a little bit too much, which I'm not going to push back too much on. But again, if you're a fan of the Sabres and you've been saying do something, Kevyn Adams,
right? He did something.
He did something.
Yeah. So
he did something.
Like from that perspective, you can't. Yeah, you can't be upset with him. I just taking a step back from the whole Sabres situation and just looking at the trade in general. That's kind of where I'm at with it.
Yeah. This is going to be one of those hindsight, like, it could look really, really good or really, really bad for one of these two teams. Right. Could be absolutely fine. I think ultimately I break it down this way. Josh Norris, I won't say clear. He's probably top 6, maybe top line potential. Dylan Cozens, probably middle 6, ceiling second line at this point. So you're paying a little bit more to upgrade there a little bit, and then as well as upgrading Gilbert a little bit for someone under contract a little bit as well.
Yeah.
I don't disagree with your point. We'll see. We'll see what happens with this one. But
yeah,
my big thing is if you wanted a shake up to the core, you can't complain about this because here's the shakeup to the core.
Yes.
Next up, LA Kings get Andrei Kuzmenko. Kind of talked about, I think, when we did Frank Saravalli's big board, I kind of asked if you thought Kuzmenko could be flipped again. Did allude to it. But third round pick in 2027, not anything significant.
He hasn't really been good. Wasn't doing well with Calgary. Gets moved to Philly, not doing well still. So it's kind of a hope it clicks with the Kings. I mean, we've seen he can score. We've seen it in the past. Kings are probably hoping it clicks and he starts scoring like that again. But yeah, it's just very much there's an asset we're not even close to thinking about. We can move a 2027 third.
I think the only thing I mentioned here in addition, it's a little head scratching that this was the Kings' only move. I know salary cap issues a little bit, but they have assets. They have an opportunity. Like teams around them in the West loaded up, and they decided to basically bring in Andrei Kuzmenko and call it a day. Again, salary cap is a real thing, but they have an excess on the blue line.
I also wonder if they just kind of like ran out of names.
Potentially.
They were just kind of left without a chair.
Yeah. Maybe they didn't want to go to where some of these other teams went price-wise. So, talked about Luke Shen. As well as Luke Shen, Winnipeg added grit up front too. So, basically grit on both forward and defense. They're the ones who end up with Brandon Tanev. He actually goes back to Winnipeg where he had been for a while.
The return.
So Winnipeg ultimately sent out a second and fourth to Pittsburgh for Luke Shen. We kind of covered that one a little bit, and then sent a second to Seattle for Brandon Tanev with some salary retained. Seconds in 2027. I don't know. I think that's a pretty fine. Like, I think these moves are fine for Winnipeg. Just like what I just said with the Kings, I think my takeaway from the day is if you're Winnipeg, you watch a lot of teams around you get better. And this is nothing against Tanev and Shen. I think they're both good additions, but the best you did is bring in two depth players.
Right. I think with Winnipeg, it was pretty easy to say, like, try and get that top six center. Push, I believe it's Nemesnikov that's playing kind of second line minutes. Push him down. It might be Adam Lowry, but pretty much get those guys back into like the ideal roles and acquire that top six guy, and they just weren't really able to do it. So I guess it's fine.
And then the fireworks started. Well, at least chronologically.
It started to get a little bigger as far as the names.
At least as far as completed deals go, the next three are where again, if the Dylan Cozens Josh Norris swap was a lot of trade deadline years, that would have been the big one of the day. But that very quickly became superseded by the next 2-3 moves. Well,
yeah.
So first up, at least the way cap wages have it, I forget exactly how this played out the day of. Rumblings of, I think the Rantanen trade started to come in a little bit before this, but Flyers bring Scott Laughton home. Got a 4th round pick and a 6th round pick in addition. Send out a pretty decent prospect and a 1st round pick to Philadelphia. Nikita Grabenkin.
Yep.
Was adding an S in there that did not exist. To Philadelphia. So 1st round pick and a higher level prospect. That's pretty nice for Philadelphia. For Scott Laughton's a good 3C, but he's not much above that.
I would say he's an okay 3C.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
I think he's a little overrated, but could be a solid player. He's also going to a better team, which could help.
Yeah.
But yeah, like you said, going home to Toronto. So, yeah, I guess those extra picks Toronto had to throw in, not or sorry, Philadelphia had to throw in the fourth and sixth. Whatever. I guess those are usually dart throw rounds. I guess fourth round being a little less so, but um, I think both teams are pretty much getting exactly what they wanted out of these two trades.
Yeah,
Or, sorry, one trade.
Toronto has one more move, so
That's what I was thinking in my
yeah,
head.
we'll kind of recap Toronto with the second move, with their other move in a little while.
Yep.
So definitely the biggest deal of the day started to become rumblings Thursday night with concern it was going to fall apart and because no extension was reached. But Mikko Rantanen ultimately agreed to an extension. I think we both agree below market value, definitely below
A
our
little bit.
projection. Our projection could have been a little bit high, maybe, but no income tax state Dallas. We would still though argue probably a little bit below.
Yeah.
Not too bad, but it's for where everything to settle and then through everything him deciding to sign the contract with the trade. I find that a little bit odd that like I guess that's where he really wanted to go, but leaving probably a little money on the table to kind
Yeah.
of not even go through the free agency process is that's I'm not going to knock the player for making a decision that hopefully he's happy with, but just seemed like a very snap decision. Pressure was on him. Like he was fully in his right to say, no, I'd really like to test the free agent market, play it out in Carolina, or Carolina can still try and flip him. But I don't know. I
There
question that a little bit.
there's a lot I think happening with this one. Um there were some reports out there that he and or his representatives kind of originally when he was still with Colorado, I think it was said that they kind of pretty much played the card of we'd be willing to sign an extension with a different team other than Colorado in some type of effort to put a little more pressure on Colorado. Um, and it was really a bluff that Colorado ended up just kind of calling and said, all right, go to Carolina. Again, this is kind of rumored, so it's not for sure, but let's say he gets to Carolina, that's just not really the spot he wants to be. The fit, at least initially, kind of while he was there, it wasn't going very well, at least to Rantanen standards.
Yeah, I mean, I do want to say like mentally, you don't know where his headspace was at. So like,
For sure.
so
Yeah.
to be fair, like I don't want to like completely. It's not as clear cut as like it wasn't a good fit. It could have been a good fit, but
Well, I mean, I'll say myself, and we can put it completely on me. It was not a good fit.
no.
Um, those might be the reasonings. We don't know exactly, but in that period of time with Carolina, things were not going the way everyone hoped they would be going. Um, Pretty much seemed to become clear that he was not viewing Carolina as a long term destination and that he only really had a handful of teams that he would view that way. This is where I wonder if it got to a point where, let's say they get down the road in discussions with Dallas, and Dallas says, this is our price on a contract, we're not going any higher. And if the option was take that deal with Dallas so this trade can happen, or you're staying in Carolina the rest of the year, maybe he preferred Dallas. And I'm not saying that's exactly what happened, but there was definitely some weird vibes kind of with Ron and Carolina. Um, so I'm wondering if preferred destination in Dallas still a solid deal, albeit we think a little below market value. But he can for sure get what he wants right now. Maybe it makes sense. And not to mention, if he stayed with Carolina and the play level continued to go the way it was going, that would hurt his value, most likely.
Yeah, I think that's probably the most important point there is his value could have declined, like, especially playing full, like a half season away from McKinnon. Like, teams could have thought
Which
that maybe he isn't the play driver they thought he was, which
that
might,
was already a question.
yeah.
Like that was being asked at this point. So I don't know. I will never know, but maybe that played into it a little bit of let's just play it safe and make sure we get a deal.
Yeah. I, Again, we don't know enough
Right.
behind the scenes, but
Exactly.
he could have ended up in Dallas had he wanted to in a couple months. I can't imagine for that much less money than he actually signed for. So
Yeah.
instead of hearing other teams out, like, I have a feeling Utah would have thrown a very big offer at him. Like,
If he wanted to go there.
but maybe, yeah, exactly. So,
Let's flip this around.
yeah.
Carolina. So Logan Stankoven, which to me that was like as soon as this connection was made, like there's actually talks going on here. That seemed like the obvious name
It
to
had to
me.
be. It
Like
had to be.
I'm not gonna like claim that. Oh, I
Broke it. No.
broke it. I'm well, not. I wasn't even gonna say broke it. I'm not gonna claim that like, oh, I picked out Stankoven and knew it was gonna be Stankoven. I did. A lot of people did. It was the obvious name.
Yeah. It wasn't going to be Wyatt Johnston.
No. It makes sense that there's I think a couple firsts is even a pretty good return for Carolina considering the circumstances. It for sure made sense there was going to be at least one in there. But to get Stankoven, who should be a clear top 6 guy for them.
Yeah.
2 first rounders and 2 third rounders. That's pretty good. If we would have said, or I'll pose the question to you, Martin Necas, Jack Drury, and a second round pick for Logan Stankoven, 2 firsts and a third. At the time, like that would have been really enticing.
Yeah.
For Carolina, considering the situation with Necas.
I was going to pose the question, if it was a 1-for-1 Stankoven for Necas swap, you're probably not saying yes, but you're also maybe not too far off.
It gets you to the table. Like you're having a serious conversation at that point.
Yeah. So then getting multiple firsts, multiple thirds in addition to that. Yeah. I think Carolina did pretty well, like maybe not arbitraging, but at least parlaying Rantanen into a pretty nice return for them. Definitely a player that they will have more control over and probably fits their style of play quite well in Stankoven.
Yeah.
I think the question that I have for Carolina is, you just acquired 2 firsts, mate. Could have you used one of those to get better? The idea I kept throwing out there, talked about it when we did your trade board, you had Rantanen first. The fit I had for Rantanen was Vancouver. And getting a Brock Besser return for Carolina, I can't imagine that Vancouver would have said no if you went to them with one of those first round picks that you just acquired.
From what I saw, that actually may have been the case. Not specifically Carolina to Vancouver, but I saw some Vancouver stuff saying a first wasn't really going to get it done.
Even a first and a third, like,
right. But even like, do they care about a third?
I know.
So, and I'm not saying that's true for sure to begin with. It was just some rumors and reports, but like, I 100% agree. Whether it's Besser or you try and get involved in some of, I don't know if like, I guess Charlie Coyle isn't quite
there weren't
but
a ton of other names that were moved afterwards. I mean, there really weren't any names after
Zetterlund maybe Ottawa acquired. That would have been interesting. He's on his way to being a top 6 winger, if not. He's
Yeah.
a real good third line winger. So like, and yeah, that's lackluster considering, and maybe it's not those first that get used for that, but yeah, you would think. And I want to say I even saw that they were trying to use those first and just couldn't find anything. So like it's not an ideal outcome to the situation. I think it's still fair though, or to be fair to them, they did very well considering the risk they took acquiring Rantanen, and then it did not go their way. They still did pretty well.
Yeah, come summer, maybe they'll use one or two of those picks for more immediate help
Yeah,
type player.
I would expect them to.
But yeah, I fully agree. I think Carolina turned that into maybe did not win on the entire situation, but they certainly did not. It did not fully blow up in their face either. So,
Right.
and then one more, I mean, obviously nothing was at the level of Rotten and Blockbuster, but this was another pretty big move. Colorado.
Yeah.
So Colorado got Brock Nelson the night before, and then one of the last kind of moves of the deadline, pick up Charlie Coyle from Boston, sending out Casey Middlestat, who last year was good for them. This year it just has not went well. So
Yeah.
not a surprise that they're willing to move on. As soon as Charlie Coyle's name was a return for Colorado, you and I both knew Middlestat was the name going the other way. So Boston also gets William Zellers and a second round pick. Colorado gets a fifth as well. Quite a bit. Really good return here for Boston.
Yeah, so just looking at this trade, I'm assuming their thought is let's try to stay competitive and make it a quicker retool and not a rebuild. Um, and if that's kind of their overall plan, this trade makes a lot of sense. You move out Coyle, who's a little bit older, 33 maybe at this point,
33, 34,
which
yeah.
almost seems crazy to me to be
Yeah.
saying that about Charlie Coyle. Um, Casey Middlestat being the younger, maybe kind of a buy low by Boston, pretty much. If he can rebound a little bit to what we saw last year with the Avs, that's huge for Boston. So it's kind of it could not work out, and you traded Charlie Coyle and pretty much get a second round pick. But you're kind of, I guess, another team taking a little bit of a risk that maybe they can kind of help a player figure it out a little bit, and then they have a good second line center.
Yeah, I think at this point, Middlestat's not a first line center, but
No.
could very well be a pretty solid two. I think him and Pasternak could be fun together because one thing Casey Middlestat has always been is he's a very good puck distributor.
Yes.
That could be a lot of fun. Give them a little bit of sheltered, like favorable offensive zone starts and stuff, and then let Lindholm and some others take some more defensive zone minutes. So we're starting to get to the end of the meaningful names. We'll run through a couple quick ones just as like they happened. Craig Smith and Peter Mrazek to Detroit for Joe Veleno. Fine by Chicago. Fine by Detroit. Like Chicago had too many goalies after getting Knight, so made sense to move Mrazek. Columbus has moved, bringing in Luke Kunin from San Jose for a fourth. Fine.
Yeah.
Utah traded big name Shea Weber. Yes, he's still in the NHL, even though he's in the Hockey Hall of Fame. This is pure cap.
Yeah.
Chicago got a couple other minor league players. Utah got a fifth round pick. Mentioned Obey Kubel to the Rangers for Brandstrom. Probably AHL kind of swaps. Buffalo's farm team, the Rochester Americans, are towards the top of the AHL standings. I think over the weekend they fell out of first place, but they are a legit like deep playoff run.
Yeah.
So that was a move for Buffalo to try to maybe give them a little bit of a boost, give the AHL team a boost a little bit. Another swap of just veterans. Dennis Cholowski to New Jersey. Adam Beckman to the Islanders. Again, AHL.
Yep.
Oh, I didn't even notice Daniel Sprong was traded again to New Jersey. 7th round pick back to Seattle. We'll do a couple more of the minor ones and finish up with the big ones. Henry Okiharu finally found his way out of Buffalo, going to Boston for a 4th round pick. Good, probably good all around there. He needed a fresh start.
Yes.
Out of Buffalo. He was good in 4 Nations, so maybe Boston will find a little something there. Who knows?
Yeah.
And then Reese Johnson to Toronto. Mark Jankowski to Carolina for a 5th round pick.
I actually like that move.
That's
a lot.
Probably a solid under the radar type thing.
Yeah.
You alluded Fabian Zetterlund, Tristan Robbins to Ottawa for Zach Ostapchuk. Yeah,
maybe
we'll stick with that. 2nd round pick as well for San Jose. That one's a little weird to me. San Jose moving out Zetterlund's a little odd.
I saw something.
Timeline.
It was more contract related. He's a pending RFA.
Yeah. 26, I think. So
pretty much you're going to start buying UFA years, and supposedly they did not quite match up or agree on value.
Which is interesting that San Jose would be concerned about, but whatever.
Yep.
Anyways, Eric Johnson back to Colorado. Philadelphia did right by the player getting Giovanni Smith. Not anything significant there. Boston, big trade with the Devils. Daniil Misule going to Boston. I probably just butchered. Mark McLaughlin going to the Devils. Get another AHL depth type player. New Jersey, we alluded to, got Cody Glass. Pittsburgh, basically a 3rd round pick and some depth. So that brings us to...
I will say really quickly that Philly-Colorado trade, the Eric Johnson one, heading to the Avalanche. Philly gets Giovanni Smith. They could cause some problems if they throw out a line of like Delorier, Smith, and Hathaway.
Yeah.
So I don't know. Just if you happen to be watching any Flyers games for some reason,
they
could be some fireworks.
Yeah, they have Menchikov. He's worth watching.
Right. Well,
if he and Torres aren't getting into it on the bench.
Right.
So
right, back to some of the
we have two trades, and this was Boston total teardown at this point.
Yeah.
The Coyle one was like, okay, things are happening. So at that point, you fully expected the Brad Marchand trade. I mean, I was starting to think I had thought it was going to happen. I had him on my trade board, so I had thought a couple weeks out it was going to happen. But Frederick, it's like, okay, that makes sense. I forget the intermittent one that we had talked about. Another
Brazo.
Yeah, Brazo not impacting. As soon as Charlie Coyle went, it's like, okay, Marchand's going. So Marchand ends up in Florida.
Yeah.
Another rat on the ice in Florida.
Yep. So 2nd round pick, 2027, back to Boston.
Could be a first.
Could be a first if Florida makes it to the Eastern Conference Final and Marchand plays in at least 50% of the playoff games. It also left open the possibility that Florida could still move this pick elsewhere.
Correct.
And then send Boston a 2028 first.
Yep.
A lot of people, I saw a lot of the reaction was, how could Boston only get a second? Which, yes, it could turn into a first, but only a guaranteed second for Marchand. It seemed like they kind of did that, let's do right, and send him to kind of a preferred destination of his choosing.
It's very similar to a couple of years ago, the Flyers sending Claude Giroux down to Florida.
It's pretty much exactly.
Yeah.
So I if they weren't going to find an extension with him,
they still could. He can still come back.
Could go back, yes. But at this point, once you kind of make that decision to, okay, there's some pieces we can move, if you're not finding a deal right now with him, get something for him.
Yeah, I I mean I agree the return is underwhelming, but you're it also kind of is what it is situation. It's you get
Yeah.
something and either like you have probably signaled that your season's done. So getting something, he can come back in unrestricted free agency, or he could leave for nothing. So at worst, you're getting something.
I do want to say too, so they didn't have to give him that kind of special treatment of where do you want to go. And we've kind of talked about this recently on some other episodes of giving people that ability. O'Reilly in Nashville being treated like he has a full no move. That to me is a little different. Because with Marchand, it kind of seemed like they got to an understanding of okay, there's going to be a trade. We'll work with you to try and get you somewhere you want to be, but you're going to be traded type of situation. Where O'Reilly was more of a, if you don't want to be traded, we won't trade you. Um, so I don't know. The other thing to factor in here, lifelong Bruin, current captain, it matters, even though fans might not want to think it does. The perception if you just trade your captain to wherever, um, other players see that. So I'm fine with how this ultimately ended for Boston and Marchand. It's not ideal, but I don't know. It's fine.
Then the last Boston teardown move, Brandon Carlo out to Toronto. Toronto got Toronto sent Boston Fraser Mitten, not top prospect, but
Decent one.
high level prospect. Yep.
Yeah.
A first round pick and a fourth round pick. In tandem with that, they sent Connor Dewar and Connor Timmins to Pittsburgh for a fifth round pick. That was basically salary roster
Yeah.
maneuvering. I like this trade a lot for Boston. I don't know if I dislike it for Toronto, but I don't like it.
I love it for Toronto.
I know you like it. You like it more than I do.
They
I
needed a right shot. Someone who was actually like good at defense too, to play with Morgan Riley, who isn't great at defense.
so now they have Tanev and Carlo on the right side with Jake McCabe. Like those are three kind of defensive defensemen.
Yeah.
I mean, so they have Riley, and am I missing anyone else puck moving wise, like play driving? That,
Um,
that's kind of my issue with it a little bit. Like
Ekman
why?
Larson,
Yep, Ekman Larson. So
which so
he should be on a third pair at this point, but
it's been Riley and Ekman Larson, and that hasn't gone very well.
yeah,
And I will say Riley in general, the past 2 or 3 years, has not been the player I think he's perceived to be.
yeah.
So to me, like I get your point kind of you've got some more defensive guys. Carlo, I think, is a little more offensive than people think. I think he's just kind of viewed as like the big defenseman
Then
who
maybe that's yeah. Maybe I'm
is good defensively. But I think they probably sat down and said we need a right shot to play with Morgan Riley, who is responsible defensively.
I kind of wonder if they could have added just a touch more to that Flyers trade to get both Lawton and Ristolainen
Maybe.
and not have to give up, because I think they probably had to pay more to do the two trades separate. I mean, Carl's a better defender. I'm not gonna like skirt around that, but could have reunited Ristolainen with McCabe. That had worked pretty well in Buffalo for a little bit of a stretch. They were a
Kind
good
of
pair.
right at the end,
Yeah,
it was doing pretty well
yeah.
for them.
Anyways, but my I don't know. I think that Toronto's just invested a lot of assets on this blue line, and it still doesn't look like there's still weakness on it. And I know it's not easy to find good all round top four right shot defenseman. I know those don't grow on trees.
For 3.485 million.
Oh yeah,
2 more
yeah.
years after this one.
But Carlo's not as. I mean, he's not as gifted offensively. Like that. That's my.
No.
That's my. I mean, Toronto of course has a lot of good forwards that can carry the puck up ice. And just need to get it to them. But that's kind of my like. Again, I don't dislike it, but that's why I'm not like full on. Oh, I love this trade. I like this trade. It's just this. I don't know. I think Toronto has now invested a lot into finding these right shot shutdown guys. I mean, going back, like they rented Ilya Lyubushkin last year, went out and got Chris Tanev this offseason. Went out, I mean, I know Jake McCabe's a left shot, but gave up assets for him, gave Chris Tanev the big contract. And now giving up more assets for Brandon Carlo. Like they've put a lot of assets into a group that still is kind of flawed. I'd kind of quick football comparison here. It's kind of like the Buffalo Bills on their defensive line, just asset after asset, and still not good enough to get it done in the playoffs. Like, I don't know. That's my ish. That's why I don't love the move, but I don't necessarily have issue because I agree with you. It does fill a need.
It fills a need. I don't know what move they make that's different to fill that need. Like what was out there to do that? Seth Jones,
maybe,
but supposedly he didn't want to go to
yeah.
Toronto. So yeah, I just
I guess
I don't know.
We'll see what they do in the off season.
I'll say value wise though. I love it value wise. You get Carlo, who on the open market probably gets a contract $2 to $2.5 million higher a year.
Yeah.
Than what you're paying him for the next 2 years after this one. Top four.
Yeah, I mean,
at least that much higher, probably.
I mean, he would have been above Ristolainen if he was on the open market for sure, and Ristolainen's like $5 million. So, I mean, again, I don't think I dislike it. I think I'm very neutral on it. Maybe I bought into the Fraser Minten hype a little bit too much too, but
yeah. So that's also a scenario. I think he kind of became, at least in the media, this top prospect, and I think it's because he was kind of Toronto's top prospect.
Yeah.
Good prospect, but not an elite player.
So I think this will be I mean, it's not going to necessarily blow up for Toronto by any means because Carl's should be solid. I shouldn't guarantee it, but like he should be very solid. Minten could become something nice in Boston.
To me, if Minten becomes like a real above average third line center, you're happy.
Yeah.
Which I guess they just traded for a third line center, Toronto. So
yeah,
like there's a need in the future potentially for that type of player, but to get a top four defenseman on a discounted deal for the next 2 years. That I guess that's just where I love it. You didn't give up any like elite premier assets. You gave up a couple good ones.
Yeah. We'll see what they do in the offseason. I now will be like they still need a puck moving defenseman to an extent, in my opinion, but or maybe it works out in the playoffs for them. Maybe they get to the second round this year.
Which I'll just say I think Carlo is better than people think offensively.
So maybe he does fit nicely in Toronto, where the most important thing is probably making a good breakout stretch, zone exit type play.
And actually, one more thing is kind of off the point of like what else would they have done at the deadline. I think they were pretty much identifying they can't keep doing Riley and Ekman Larson because they were pretty much running like one pair out there that they were confident in.
Yeah.
And McCabe and Tanev. So some type of switch up needed to happen there, I think, and it did. So we'll see how it plays out.
Yeah, I'll leave my maybe the Ristolainen and Lawton idea on the table.
Yeah.
Maybe
Yeah.
that could have been a decent one, but I think kind of we'll wrap the episode here. I think one thing that became very apparent at this deadline is if you're in the Atlantic Division and the Central Division, winning that division became a lot more important because Tampa, Florida, Toronto have loaded up. One of those teams is going out in the first round. In the Central, Winnipeg, Colorado, Dallas. Well, Winnipeg loaded less up, which is where, like, are you sure you know what you're doing here? If they can end up in first place still, like, it's gonna look a whole lot better.
Yeah.
Like, if there's a Colorado Dallas matchup, arguably one of the cup favorites is going out in the first round.
Yeah.
I shouldn't say arguably one of the cup favorites. One of the cup favorites is losing in the first round. So I think that was one kind of takeaway from the deadline is like those two divisions. Sometimes you talk about, well, the stretch doesn't matter a ton, like rest some of your guys.
Yeah, it's going to matter.
It's going to matter.
Yep, for sure.
So that's kind of our retrospective. Our next episode will be a prospective. So subscribe, Max Stern Podcast, available on all major podcast platforms. X, Blue Sky, at AFP Analytics. We'll post when new episodes become available there as well. So we appreciate you listening, and we'll talk to you next time.